Weak handshakes are the worst.
Oh, that's all right. No, they're fine. They're okay.
Okay.
That's all right. They're not,
I'm normally like
okay.
each to their own, but a non-firm handshake
Sometimes
is
a
one
really,
thing I draw
really
the line.
overly firm handshake, I'm like, okay, that's all right,
Yeah,
mate.
take it
Just
easy.
take it easy. That's all
I
good.
get it, all right.
The double handshakes? Is this deal?
Oh,
Good to see you, mate. I'm like, 2 hands. All right. You mean business. Go.
you do the clapper then. Welcome to the Integration Station. I am your host, Eleanor, a child and adolescent occupational therapist. And with me today is my co-host, Michael. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Eleanor.
I'm very squeaky.
You're very squeaky?
It's my first introduction.
It was good.
Okay.
You got through everything that you needed to get through. You introduced who you were,
Yep.
what you do, your role.
You're also a child and adolescent
I'm
occupational
also,
therapist.
yeah. We both are.
Help you out there.
Absolutely. And for those who are new to the podcast, so we take those questions that you throw in, we try and answer them, we try and find the fun in learning that. Hopefully there's a bit of laughter as well. I think that keeps us going, a bit of fun and laughter. If you do have questions, then where can we send them?
You can send it through to our Instagram page, OTFC Group, or our email, podcast@otfcgroup.au.
That is correct. Love to check the emails. I mean, I think I said last episode I don't get a heap of them, but that's okay. Still send them. I'll read them. Yeah.
I guess that's typically the aim of an email, I would hope.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes a while to get back to people, but it's on my list in Outlook. You know, if they've got like all the different mailboxes you have, sometimes it's buried and hidden behind other things. But anyway, this is all waffle. Well, thanks for kicking it off, Eleanor.
You're welcome.
Should we go straight into an activity of the week?
Yes, our regular segments.
Done. Here we go. Thanks for kicking it off, Eleanor. Here we go. Kick it off, Eleanor.
What's yours this week, Michael?
My activity of the week, I had a couple, was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. One of my clients was using the platform swing. For those that know, it's a large rectangular swing. And he was playing a game of quoits. You know quoits?
Yeah, I do.
Ring toss.
Ring toss.
People call it ring toss, but the official name is quoits. He was lying prone, so on his tummy on the platform swing, and what he was trying to do was obtain the quoits from the floor. So you had to lie and push himself off with his hands, grab a ring, and we're using hula hoops.
Yep.
Sorry, I should have clarified. This is like
a mega version.
Yeah, right. It's a giant quoits, and he was throwing it onto a flexion swing or a UFO swing. So like it's got a big rod in the middle.
Yeah.
Using it as the pole, and he had to try and pick up the hoop and try and throw it into the swing, and that was really hard.
Yeah.
Right. So
Can imagine.
having done it before, I didn't do it yesterday, but having done it before, it's actually a really tricky task because the whole time, if we're talking about some of the skills that's working on, not only is there that hand-eye coordination, so just throwing quoits, I don't know if you've played quoits before.
It's hard.
It's hard, right?
I think it's the target's so specific, and then it's not necessarily the most predictable trajectory when you throw the ring or throw the hula hoop, and it takes a bit of adjustment.
Really tricky. But he was engaged, and we're doing it for a while. But anyway, so the skill there is to be able to not only get it up high enough while you're prone on your tummy, because you got to think like you're quite low to the ground there, and you have to try and get your arm up high enough to throw it, to get it above the trajectory. Like the trajectory has to go high enough to get over onto this pole. For a start, like this hand-eye coordination, just getting it accurate. And some of his throws are really accurate.
Yeah.
I was amazed. I'm like, man, you're doing a great job here. But they weren't hitting the target, but they were going in the general vicinity. And I'm like, that's good. There's that. There's the shoulder stability, like getting your arm above that gravity, to actually hold it up there. To be able to do that, to actually push your arms on the floor. So you're really working really hard. And then the neck and head control. Yeah. So if we're talking about like an upper limb, vestibular, eye, hand coordination activity, it's pretty high up there. Yeah. Really intense. And so we're doing that for, I don't know, about 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, that's really good.
Perseverance. Could not fault him. Certainly one for me and one that I probably don't do enough of. And it does, like, it's not, you don't have to do a giant thing. You can actually use small quoits. You could throw anything, really. Yeah. You know, throwing at a target whilst you're prone is in lying on your tummy, man, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of innovation going on. And if we're talking about some of those key aspects of sensory integration and even just, sensory-based therapy in general, anytime you're doing something in prone where you're working your tummy muscles, anytime you're doing something with hand-eye coordination, anytime you're using both sides of your body, that ticks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, for sure.
So can I replicate it at home? Yeah, I could use a gym ball.
Yeah, definitely.
I could just do it lying on the floor.
Yeah.
Scooter board.
I think you could use, like a hula hoop, and then you just need something to throw over.
Person.
Yeah.
Not a young child. A willing parent. Stand there, Mum.
Yeah. You're the target.
Here it comes. Yeah.
I mean, that could be very motivating though.
I think he was more interested. Yep. I think he was more interested in hitting me than the target at that time. So that's fine.
At the Plus Space, I love playing that giant quoits game on the surfboard, which is like a balancing piece of equipment, and having the hula hoop set up, say, behind, and maybe using something like a pool noodle to kind of hitch them and bring them closer to you, and turning around balancing before you throw.
Perfect.
So lots of, similar adjustments and things like that, which is really good fun.
Great idea.
Yeah, lots of planning and problem solving in that too.
Yeah.
My activity... Actually, as I was doing it, I said to my friend that I was hanging out with, I'm like, someone's going to ask me this week what my favourite activity is, and it's this. This is awesome. But we were doing, we called it like our stuntman challenge. So we were doing jumping and crashing from a trampoline, which he was loving. And this is someone that is, he's got reasonable physical coordination. So he was quite precise in his movements as he was jumping and crashing onto this big pile of crash mats. And I said to him, it looks like those, the really big blow up ones that they get for a stunt, because we just piled quite a few on top of each other, and then I'm holding it steady so they don't all crumble when he lands on it. And then I was like, I feel like we should get, a building for you to jump over or something to jump into. And he's like, yeah, that sounds cool, something to like jump over. And we ended up setting something up using a bunch of blocks to hold it in place. We've got these things called tricking hoops, which is like this giant donut, essentially. And he's like, I'm going to jump through the donut, like a ring of fire from the trampoline. And it's quite funny because we're like, yep, how can we set this up? We set it all up. And then I think we both went, oh, hang on, I think we're at level 10. We've gone from level 1 to level 10. And both of us need to just figure out some levels in between so we feel comfortable with it. But he was so receptive to it, which was awesome. So we took the hoop down and we just practiced jumping over something. And then we had something small to add on top of that to keep jumping over. And then we're like, okay, feel ready for the hoop to go back on top of that. So I really loved his adaptive responses in that to be able to problem solve through those movements. And then by the time we put the ring back up, he was feeling really confident because he had a lot of success in the levels beforehand. But even just that willingness of, okay, hang on, I think we've pitched it a little higher. There's some levels in between that we need to accomplish first. And it was just so collaborative, and we ended up bringing others in to come and have a go as well. A little bit harder to replicate at home, but if you're looking for a great therapy activity idea. But having said that, if you're looking for a Ring of Fire challenge, I think you could use, you could just be running and jumping to crash into some things, and maybe you've got something small that you're diving over that's, you're burning building or something, or even if you were to create a bit of like a smaller space to dive through. I think you could fashion something in a safe way, obviously not with the same height that we were doing, but whilst I think things in the therapy space should be translated to activities at home, there's obviously a reason that these spaces are set up the way that they are so that we can challenge and extend beyond that. But I think there's good variations of that too. But it's really fun. And we ended up doing it, I don't know, half an hour from where we started to where we ended up. And it was just, really cool.
Should we go with a regulation strategy?
Yeah.
Regulation strategy of the week.
Did you have one that you've been suggesting this week or using?
I was actually talking to a parent about some things in the school environment. It was one of my young people that loves to have a lot of big input. So like big jumping on the trampoline, big squashes with the gym ball. And there's been an increase of that recently. And so we're still needing a lot of that outside of the therapy space. So while we get it big in therapy, great, we're still seeking a lot in the therapy space. And obviously in a school environment, they don't have giant trampolines and foam pits. But being able to just go back and use a large gym ball, like a 55 centimeter gym ball, laying that young person on their tummy in that prone position and providing a good amount of force.
Yeah.
Rolling that gym ball from their sort of shoulder blades down towards their legs and back up. And when I say a reasonable amount of force, like I wasn't lying on the ball, but I had most of my arms and chest weight just sort of pushing down on the ball. It's akin to what you would do if you were giving someone a massage. That sort of really putting that force in, because just a gentle roll on the ball, just rolling it backwards and forwards is not really going to do anything. And I don't always do that. Sometimes I forget how effective that can be, and just squashing someone with that, as long as you're steering away from the head and you're doing it safely and you're in a position that is safe, just instantly calm. Yeah. Instantly calmed. So that was mine. And so it was about having that conversation about transferring that to school and to home, because that is something that the school could do. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Space.
And I think you can actually, because the idea with the gym ball is it can, it disperses the weight. I always remember seeing a video of Dino with a young friend, and he would kind of roll over to have his hands on the ground, feet up, and then roll back. And this client, a very trusting relationship, loved that. And that was someone that, that intensity. And I guess, thinking about the age of the client and what feels good for them. But it can be so collaborative, as to go, how does that feel? Do you want firmer pressure? Do you want a bit lighter? And just checking in with them to make sure it feels good. But such a great way to get deep pressure input.
That's a good point. I did actually ask that throughout. I kept checking back in. It's do you want it harder or softer? And obviously this is a young adolescent whose language is quite tricky. And so, but they were able to express that they want it that hard and more. I want more.
Yeah, awesome.
And so I'm like, okay, you're giving me and it kind of comes back to our podcast. I think last week we're talking about, for those limited verbal or non-speaking clients, about, am I seeing cues in their body about, is this working? Yep. And you could see that this is someone who didn't want to move and was smiling calmly as opposed to smiling happily, I'm excited. This is a really calming input, and looking up as soon as I finished, looking back going, "Are you going to do some more, mate?" Yeah. I want more of this. Yeah. And using those cues, absolutely. Right. Yeah. To get a bit of feedback as to, is this working?
It just reminds me of a friend, I guess, on that same topic, that in sessions we used to do, I guess, something similar, with a gym ball with pillows to give that squish and deep pressure. He would just move over to a space at times, just land on his tummy and look over his shoulder at me. And I'm like, oh,
that's the cue.
I gotcha. I'll get the pillows. We're ready for a bit of deep pressure. I get it, nice. Which is cool. I think mine for this week actually has been some kind of deep breathing stuff. And for a friend of mine that's been having a bit of a tricky time generally, just more anxious, not feeling in control, more disorganized in himself. And I was like, okay, how can I kind of bring in encourage some of those deep breaths? And I originally tried with bubbles, and I was, trying to take that deep breath in and blow out. And funnily enough, his parent that brought him in was like, oh, I actually really enjoyed that for me, the visual component. So, me as the therapist, I've got my deep breathing, and they've got the chance to watch the bubbles, and we're having a lovely time. But it's, my friend was not as interested in that. But in the activity that we were doing really big movements on a swing that involved me moving him around. But it just somehow evolved that I was just trying to model that deep breathing, and then he would do it too, but I cued it in with the swing. So I'd go, okay, let's get ready to release. Big breath in and then out. And then I would throw the swing in the exhale, and he just loved that. And then he'd go, let it go. Oh, big release is what we were calling it too. He's like, oh, big release, let it go. And then he was cueing me with that. So then I'd listen in for him. He'd take the deep breath in, breathe out, and then I'd throw him in the swing, and he just really responded to that. And then, funnily enough, as we were leaving, there was something unexpected in the waiting room, and I could see he was feeling unsure about that. So I just talked him through it, simple language, and then he actually did the
wow.
And I was like, big release works here too. Now we're feeling good to go. And we were able to move out, which was awesome.
That's awesome.
So pretty cool to see that kind of transfer. But I think, once again, power of deep pressure, but also the deep breathing too.
And on that, again, just reflecting back, when we were doing the gym ball roll with my friend, there was that big breath in, and then as I roll the ball over you, you breathe out, and then
that's awesome.
All that air comes out with a push down.
Yeah,
and
that's a fun way to
same
incorporate
thing, right?
that.
So I think what you've mentioned there is that in both activities, you've given them something that is enjoyable to do, but you've tied the deep breathing into that. So they're actually getting the input, the benefit of deep breathing as well as the benefit of deep pressure.
Yeah.
A lot of the regulation strategies we
Yeah.
talked about have been very much deep pressure related.
Yeah. It's just so hard. I know. Just
it's
linked in
very
so
regulating.
strongly, isn't it? Yeah. Very regulating.
Very regulating.
There's, the other ways that you can do that with like the 5-finger breathing to trace your hands along the outline of your fingers, taking a deep breath in as you move up your finger and then out as you move down, or the candle, pretend like you're blowing out candles. Just very accessible. It's just about what's working
there are plenty of deep
you,
breathing.
young person. Yeah.
Plenty of them on
Yeah, it's
online.
cool. So what have we got to talk about today? We're going to do a bit of a deep dive into baby sensory versus ASI. Really, this has come off the back of Michelle's request when she was in here the other week. I think it's something that we hear about a lot. Lots of really little people involved with that. But what's the difference between a group that you might be involved with and something in air sensory integration? So we'll talk through a few elements with that.
Yeah. And I actually hope people did enjoy Michelle's podcast the other week. Michelle, our CEO, had some really interesting stuff on stress.
Yeah.
And if you haven't heard the episode, go back and have a listen to that. But she did ask a question about, baby sensory and I guess ASI. And I guess I asked the question about, why is that important to talk about? And I think it came off the back of, some people go through the baby sensory program and there's this misnomer that because it's got sensory attached to it, therefore it's akin to sensory integration.
Yes.
And for me, I also, and maybe I'm just a bit biased here because we spent a lot of time trying to delineate air sensory integration from other sensory-based strategies or sensory approaches.
Yep.
There's a set of fidelity measures for air sensory integration, which we've talked about before. and when I think of fidelity measures, I think of, and this is probably me, trying to understand the differences between different types of music. So whether it's yacht rock or not yacht rock, right? It's, again, from last week's podcast. But
yeah, we're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it. Sorry. I just got down a rabbit hole on that. But the understanding of air sensory integration, having these fidelity measures and being able to use that is what we're doing, actually meeting those criteria. So that criteria are really important. Now, I'm not saying that baby sensory espouses that what they do is sensory integration, not suggesting that at all. But I think for some families who are looking to have some sensory-based input to understand that the baby sensory stuff is different. Yeah. It's a very different thing, and it shouldn't be replacing what potentially is required for a young person in therapy.
Yeah.
But it can be an effective exposure for young people.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a baby sensory class?
No, I haven't. My little nephew, I know, had been going along to those classes, and my sister loved it. He loved it, and very much, from what I could understand, it seemed like it was about a lot of exposure to different sensory experiences in a safe environment with support from the caregiver and in a group with other little people as well to start. Just lots of things we're processing and interacting with in our environment. Did you do that with your son?
I didn't. My wife did, and she did a few sessions, and I think was okay. But I think at times those group dynamics for him at the start were a little bit trickier. I know my sister, my nephew did a whole bunch of baby sensory, and really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I think that's the differentiation there is obviously I guess it's hard to know at such a young age, but the baby sensory is more aimed at sort of neurotypical or typically developing children, and so you would be expecting that young children babies that is, to have that input's going to increase their exposure to tolerating different sensory input.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, it's similar to if I was doing, you know, any sort of sensory activities at home. It's just increasing exposure.
Yep. But you've obviously got that lens working in a sensory-based environment that you could amplify that or know things that you could use that's going to tap into that. Whereas I do appreciate with a program like this, you're getting exposure as a parent as well about things that you can do to broaden that sensory exposure, which is cool. Yeah,
very much so. And I think that's probably a good thing for parents is for something like baby sensory, it's quite not approachable. It's quite, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, it's quite easy to
accessible.
Accessible is the right word. Thank you. Not approachable. It's quite accessible, right? And it's not a therapy per se, so it doesn't have the costs attached to therapy, and it's a good exposure, and also for parents to meet other parents and to have that almost like
chance to connect.
You know, like a mothers group sort of thing. You know, the old that sort of approach, which is quite effective as well. But it has that opportunity. But you know, obviously, I think the coming back to the original reason we're talking about it is that it's good just to be really clear about the differentiation between what we do as therapists, or what therapists, even play therapy, for example, and what a play therapist would look at compared to what's involved in baby sensory. And there's a role for that, but obviously for some young children, babies, and if there is something that's being observed as more challenging at that age, then you would absolutely start looking at other avenues. And it's a good initial exposure to different sensory strategies.
Yeah.
But the fidelity measures, if we go back to that, I look at those all the time, because I think when we are trying to outline what our therapy is and what makes our therapy point of difference to other therapies, it really comes down to understanding the role of those fidelity measures. And I think we talked about it recently, about what's the role of actually doing fidelity measures. And I think particularly for our younger clients, you know, under 11, 12 years of age, the fidelity measures mean that the therapy that we're doing meets a criteria that would be deemed as, yes, this is what sensory integration is supposed to be.
Yep.
And it gives the therapist the chance to reflect on what they're actually providing is meeting the goals that are outlined using the therapeutic approach that has been agreed upon universally.
Yes.
So
actually, even hearing when we were at the conference last year that the fidelity measures also has supported in the research and the growing evidence base to make sure that the therapy modality is replicable, and you've got the manual to support in that. But then also if you're conducting a session, this is what you would expect from that to confirm that indeed these are being implemented as we would expect as part of this therapeutic approach.
And I think that's really important to be aware of, is there's a lot of work that goes into, there was a lot of work that went into developing those fidelity measures to make sure it did stand out against other approaches.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is a difference between what we do and what other services do for that exact reason. So I'm supportive of baby sensory. I think it's a good thing for a lot of babies. And I've always been one that if you can expose children at a young age to a variety of sensory inputs, then it's only going to increase their development. Obviously, some children find those things harder.
Yeah.
And so I guess it comes back to respecting that child and respecting what, you know, they feel they can and can't do in that instance.
Yeah. But what those sensory preferences look like. And obviously exposure is really important, but in a way that is really safe and supportive for their, you know, developing bodies and nervous system. I think when we're referring to exposure, it's not just about having them tolerate that for a period of time or even pushing past it if it's obviously feeling uncomfortable. It's doing it in a really safe way at their level and giving them opportunities to process and integrate that different input. I suppose enrichment, I think, is another term that we could be using in this space. It's not just about exposure. It's meant to be supportive for their development and
Correct.
Enriching that capacity.
Yeah. And I go on further to say, like, baby sensory is, when they're very young, but, even thinking about people often, and this is kind of going on a segue, but it's true. It's like, what's the difference between what you guys do in ASI therapy compared to if we went to a playground or bounce or something like that? Yeah. And that's almost a separate question, but it does tie into this. It goes, well, if I think about the what we're doing in ASIs, it comes back to that. We've got fidelity measures. And bounce, places like Bounce, which is, for people that don't know, it's a big sort of warehouse space with trampolines and climbing equipment, a whole bunch of sensory input, I guess, lots of different pieces of equipment. You've got that, or you've got a playground, obviously, and they're great for typically developing children or neurotypical children or even neurodivergent children. Yeah. But what the difference is that unless you're someone who has that awareness of if you're a therapist or someone has an awareness of things like fidelity measures and how to implement that, you're going into an environment that is quite dynamic. It's not a controlled environment, whereas opposed to the ASI clinic space, which is designed to be a controlled environment to work on some of these things, to support exposure in a safe way. Yeah. A playground or a bounce or those sort of places don't have that same level of support. And so you could be exposing someone to something that's quite overwhelming for them and it triggers I don't want to come back here. Yes. And, that's a challenge in itself. But that's always whenever someone mentions that, I'm always like, well, yes, I get bounce and I get a playground and I think they are really great things, but it's not a replacement for therapy. No. A great way to meet sensory needs and get that movement in and physical activity, which is so good for young people. But yes, I think when parents sometimes say to us, oh, it just kind of looks like you're playing, or if it is, I get that comment about, oh, back just on the playground. That to me is a compliment in some ways because it's suggesting a level of ease in what you're doing. I guess I think you've said it before in the past, like therapy doesn't have to be something that feels really hard or can't be fun. And I think ASI space in particular, that's a huge component, that it's child-led, it leans into what those play opportunities look like for them. But it actually is just showing that, I'm taking away the fidelity measures all the time in my mind. Like, okay, so have I exposed them to these 3 different forms of sensory input? Am I making sure that I'm bringing in elements of postural and ocular control and bilateral integration? Okay, have I pitched the just right challenge? Are they having a level of success? But I'm grading depending on how they've gone within that. There are so many things that are ticking away in the background. But if that's just coming across as play and that's not immediately recognizable, I actually think that, we must be in a good flow with that, and the child's really engaged and they're enjoying what we're doing, and that's where we're going to see that progress. And I do always love too, for any activity that we're doing, I feel like if someone said, well, what are you working on here? Be able to list off, we can see this is really challenging their motor planning, or they're using both sides of their body. Like that bilateral control is really working hard here. Even just the activities you're referring to at the start, you were listing off some, several key components. And a lot of those things, what a great activity, like you said, to meet those fidelity measures. I think you would have just absolutely ticked those things through, and knowing that that's what's going on in the background when we're using a therapeutic approach. And, the fidelity measures, it's almost worth doing a separate episode just on understanding and outlining the fidelity measures, because
that's true.
They are there and they're really important, and they're, a keystone to what our therapy looks like. And I guess in summarising, there's obviously a difference between sensory enrichment stuff and then sensory integration, but I'm never going to say don't go down to the beach and do sensory play, or don't do food play that's sensory based, or don't play with Play-Doh, and do all those things. And I think it always comes back to understanding that child's sensory preferences and respecting those and providing what they need that's regulating. And if there are things that are challenging, try and expose them to that in a safe way. And if you get a really big kickback and it's just not working, then you go, okay, maybe something's happening here. And be curious about that. And there's different ways to approach that. So
and I feel like you had a good you'd put together a little, like that key summary against those different headings.
Yes.
Around baby sensory and ASI, which I think would be really good to share as a bit of a summary.
Sure, yeah. And I guess that's where it is. Something like baby sensory, that target audience, as I mentioned, more sort of neurotypical, typically developing children. And it is the goal around enrichment and development And I guess the people who are involved is more play-based and facilitators that not necessarily therapists.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be. They may be, you know, part-time therapists, may be involved in baby sensory. And it's about sensory exposure as opposed to the sensory integration, which is obviously children with sensory processing differences, maybe a confirmed diagnosis of sorts. And, you know, the goal is to address those sensory differences and to support increased involvement in functional activities through that therapeutic intervention. And, you know, obviously ASI trained therapists such as ourselves would be the people that are doing that. And they talk, you know, sometimes they talk about, you know, correcting or addressing correction. Like I think there is still an element of that in the wording, but, you know, more recently talking to some of the ASI gurus, they're steering away from the correction and more the understanding and integrating to go, look, there are differences and those differences are normal. Like everybody has different ways of processing information rather than correcting in more of a medical model. We're going with, well, how can we integrate to support functional development?
Absolutely.
And respecting differences because everybody has sensory differences. And I guess that's the focus. And even that in itself requires an understanding of, I'd say, understanding the difference between the medical model and the social model. Yeah. And, you know, we can talk about it in another podcast about neurodiversity, but understanding those differences to be able to say, well, I want to make sure that I'm providing something that's affirming for this person and supporting their sensory needs without exposing them to something that's going to be detrimental.
Yeah, definitely.
So
it's not like a right and a wrong way about going about things, you know. I think about pencil grips and holding cutlery and all that kind of thing where there's maybe an expectation about what it should look like. But if it works for that young person, it's effective and it's not leading to unnecessary strain or effort or anything like that. But I don't know, if it works, right?
Yeah, I think everyone has their own way of doing things.
Yeah.
And as long as it's allowing that person to do what they want to do, I think there's a lot of greater understanding of everybody's an individual and does things their own way. So that can only be a good.
Our producer Eli, how he uses his cutlery, you know, it works for him.
I haven't seen it. You have to show me later. No, you don't have to show me later. You eat it how you want it, mate. That's fine. That's good. Excellent.
Yeah, effective.
Well, that's an effective way to finish up, I think. I think we had a bit of a dive into those areas. And I think we might have to do a fidelity measures podcast. I don't know if the audience wants that, but I think it's probably worth just
give us a like, thumbs up if you want to go down that path.
If you don't, write in, give us questions, and we will absolutely answer them.
Happen.
Otherwise, it's going to happen. It'll probably happen anyway. I think it's probably worthwhile episode.
Yeah,
educating for everybody. So, if you do have questions, where do we go? Instagram?
We go to Instagram, OTFC Group, or you can email through to our email. Michael loves to read his emails, which is podcast@otfcgroup.au.
That's it. All right. We'll see you all next week then. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.